It is awesome to be with all of you and in this opportunity to level up. That is what I spend every day thinking about. That's what gets me out of bed every morning, is how do we help more women and men professionals to level up for themselves and for the folks that they serve in a leadership role. As I was thinking about the opportunity to be with you all today, I was reminded of a very personal story. So this is Geraldine Adeline Stockman. Her friends called her Jerry. Her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren called her Gigi. So this is my Gigi. And in 2020, very sadly, my Aunt Mary, the oldest child of Gigi, passed away unexpectedly. What was really tragic about that, not only to lose a child at any age, but my Aunt Mary had really been the person who was largely responsible for Gigi's health care. She was the person that talked with the insurance companies, managed her billing, dealt with her doctor's appointments, et cetera. And so she was at a real loss. She was still living independently at 93 years old. And her brain, her mind was sharp as a tack, but her body was starting to give out. So she was really limited to a wheelchair most of the time because of her knees and her back and her hips. And her eyesight was really failing. She was practically legally blind. So it was difficult for her to do a lot of the day-to-day tasks, but still living independently, had figured it out. The year after Aunt Mary's passing, Gigi had a number of falls, one of which landed her in the hospital. And coming home from the hospital, also managing congestive heart failure, we were gifted with home health for a lot of reasons. We had PT, we had OT, we had the nurses in. They taught her how to get in and out of the shower without falling. They taught her how to get in and out of her wheelchair. They came in and looked at her apartment and reorganized things so that she could safely navigate around her apartment and continue doing what she wanted to do, which was to live independently. At one point, she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and that was a real scare for us because her home health was starting to run out of eligibility. So when I called the branch director and mentioned that we need some time, she's not going to be able to see well enough to check her insulin or check her sugar levels or administer insulin. And so the branch director called back to their corporate office, made some arrangements because it wasn't typically covered from an eligibility perspective, and was able to extend that for 3 or 4 weeks. Well, we were able to get family around the situation and care for Gigi in the way that she needed care for. The work you do matters. You touch the lives of people around the country who have their Gigis and their people that they love, that allow them to stay in their homes and flourish. And I will tell you, Gigi lived another 2 years of quality life with dignity and independently because you set her up for success and you set our family up for success. So I realize that we've not yet touched on the hospice side, and I will get to you. Unfortunately, too many families have faced that as well, mine included. But for every one of you that touches situations like this, thank you. On behalf of all of us that have loved ones that you've cared for, would you all give yourselves a huge round of applause? Now, as you can imagine, Gigi because she was independent, she was also a little stubborn. Does anybody have grandmas like that, kind of stubborn? And she really liked the people that came to her regularly. She did not like it so much when they sent in a substitute. Does that ever happen, right? Some other nurse has to come in and she's like, well, I really like the girl I had last week, who's this person? So they get attached. So she found certain people that she worked with were really the best of the best. And I know that all of you have worked with people that are the best of the best. So I want you to do something for me. In just a moment, I'm going to have them bring up the house lights, but just think about this for a moment. I want you to think about the best performer you've ever worked with. Might be here at Inhabit, might have been in a former organization, but a single person, I want you to think about that person, that rock star, that person you wish you could replicate. You could have 10 more of them, Susies or Bobs or Sallys or Johns, right? You have that person in your mind, you know that individual by name. I want you to think next about what are the attributes that made that person so special, that made that person such a rock star? How would you describe them? What are the words, the one word attribute or characteristic that comes to mind? Have you got that in mind? All right, this is a little risky with 600 of you, but we're going to bring up the house lights for just a moment. And I'm going to ask you to shout them out to me. What are the words that came to mind? Dedicated? Attitude. Heart, supportive. Empathetic, reliable. Professionalism. Intentional, curious. What was it? Tenacious, I love that. Innovative. Honesty, I hear a faint voice over here. Fearless, love that. Engaged, dependable. Critical thinking, I haven't heard sense of humor yet. I always think that's a really important one. I like to work with people that have a good sense of humor and are positive, right? So many amazing words that came to mind when we think about the best performers we've ever known. What didn't we hear? We didn't hear they were 28. They were 52. We didn't hear they went to XYZ school. We didn't hear that they had 15 years of experience. So many times we assess others and ourselves from criteria that has very limited validity in terms of predicting success, right? We don't admit it if you do this. Some people might take a resume and back into how old the person is. And it's like, ooh, they're probably too young to do X, or they're probably too old to do Y. What we know from research is that age has an inverse correlation to predicting success and performance. An inverse correlation. So what does that mean? It means that I would bet the vast majority of this talented room at some point in your career, if not today, are leading individuals more senior to you in age. Is that fair? I would also bet that many of you in this room, at some point in your careers, if not today, have, which would correlate to age, have fewer years of professional job experience than some of the people you lead. It has an inverse correlation. It doesn't predict anything, nor does interest. You know, I would love to be Beyonce, but I'm with you, and I promise not to sing. I could maybe dance, but that's for another time. So interest doesn't correlate. Wanting to be something, wanting to be, well, I want to lead this organization, I want to lead this region. How often, particularly in healthcare, which I spent the last 13 years of my corporate career in, do we promote people based on they're a rock star bedside nurse, so therefore we're going to promote them to a supervisor or leader because they have an interest. it doesn't necessarily predict success. And the list goes on. Why do I share this with you? For two reasons. Number one, women and Black, Indigenous, and people of color predominantly tend to over-index on performance. What does that mean? It means that the community of people that think that they have to be perfect at something before they raise their hand. And the imposter syndrome around, I haven't done it long enough, I'm not old enough, I'm not experienced enough, creeps in. To the credit of our predominantly white male counterparts, they over-index on potential. They fake it till they make it. Right? That reminds me of a Taylor Swift song. They fake it till they make it, baby. And so we should take a page out of that playbook, right? So that's not an indictment of our male counterparts. What it says is we sometimes hold ourselves to these false beliefs of what we can do with our potential. And to level up, we have to put that aside. To level up the teams that work with us, we have to put that aside. What we'd rather roll the dice on is potential. What we'd rather over-index on for ourselves and the people that work with us is this notion of talent. Now, this is a mouthful, talent. It's non-teachable, hardwired, so DNA, spontaneous, can't help yourself, pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that is not acquired through effort or education. You can't read a book, get a coach to put it in. And here's a really important key. It provides intrinsic satisfaction. What does that mean? It feels good when I'm doing it. It fills my cup. It makes my heart sing. I had the benefit of having dinner last night with Tanya Marion and T. Ray and a whole bunch of other really incredible people, and listening to T. Ray talk about having gone from sales, a career in sales, to organizational development, and listening to her talk about the work she does, she lit up. She was passionate, on fire, had a heart job, something that made her heart sing. So here's an easier way for you to do some self-assessment, and I want you to really go introspective for a moment, because here's what I know as a leader myself for 35 years. We spend a lot of time learning about, focusing on, reading about, going to conferences about how to be a better leader of others. This first portion of what we're going to talk about today is about you. Because we're better leaders when we're really clear on our gifts and talents and how we show up. So how can you assess that in sort of a non-scientific way? If you're not going to take a behavioral assessment or do something that really has high predictive validity, I offer you this. It's those things that you do spontaneously. You can't help yourself. Imagine that you walk in to an event and there's lines queued up and there's people that you're trying to get to the front of the line. It reminds me of immigration when you've traveled internationally, right? And there's all this, and it's kind of chaos. If you're the person that naturally thinks, you know, if they put another stanchion right here and reorganize those people like this whole thing would be so much better. Right? You laugh because you're like, yep, that's me. Or you're laughing because you're like, that would never occur to me. Right? Like my daughter, never would occur to her. You do it with excellence. If you are playing in a place of talent, you do it better than most people. It's that thing people come to you and say, can you help me with this? Right? It's that thing that others are aware that you just are really, really good at, and you're better at it than most people. So you do it with excellence. It's consistent. It's not that you sometimes do it, and it's sometimes spontaneous. It's always. It's always. And lastly, it fills your cup. It's affirming. It makes your heart sing. When you're playing in a space of talent, it feels good. So what gets me out of bed every morning is helping people find positions, jobs, roles that feel like hobbies. And if this adds up for you, you are so blessed. But it's figuring out, how do you do more of this, and how do you find people on your team that can do more of what makes their heart sing? My kids have been around this science for a really long time, and when they were young, we would drive up to a drive-through or be in a store, and if somebody was crabby to us, one of my 2 children would say, poor career choice. Be careful where you share the information. When you look at these words backwards, the acronym is ACEs. So these are your ACEs rather than your spaces. And we all have both. Nobody is talented at everything. So it's really about figuring out where is that sweet spot for you. So here's what I like to say. Every single person has talent, right? Whatever your faith tradition, whatever your belief system, we were all gifted with talent. The question is, talent for what? The question is, talent for what? So it takes me back to when my daughter Jordan, she's now 31 and has been the one that's graced me with my 3 amazing grandchildren. But when she was about 8 years old, she doesn't love this picture, by the way, which tickles me to use it. When she was about 8 years old, she's sitting in the back seat of the car, and we're driving along, and she says, "Mommy, I've decided I know what I want to be when I grow up." "Great, sweetie, what's that?" She says, "Well, I want to be one of those people that everyone comes and tells their problems to." I said, "Oh, okay, like a therapist or a psychiatrist, counselor." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, sweetie, that is a really wonderful profession, and I'm sure you'd be wonderful at that. Why do you think that?" And she says, "Well, on the playground, everyone comes up to me and they tell me all their problems, and I know exactly what to tell them to do." I said, "Well, okay. Well, first of all, what an honor. I mean, that's really neat that everybody trusts you and feels comfortable coming and talking to you. That's a pretty cool thing. But, sweetie, you might want to know that as a therapist or a counselor or a psychiatrist, you really do a lot of listening. Your job is to ask really good questions and provocative questions, kind of a heady conversation with an 8-year-old, but, it's a lot of listening." And there's a pregnant pause from the back seat, to which she finally chimes in and says, "Well, what's a job where I get to do all the talking?" We'll come back to that, because she did find a job where she gets to do all the talking. But how often do we or others chase dreams or things that are somebody else's idea, or a title, or a status? And yet, the reality is, we're not always focusing on the right thing, which is, what can we do with excellence, spontaneously, better than most, which feels great and doesn't feel like work? And so even as you continue to level up, my challenge to you is, think about your ACEs. How do you lean into those more? How do you take agency and ownership over your career development, over your professional growth. And by the way, as a C-suite coach and an executive coach, I work with individuals at the top of their game in terms of their profession. But they're still growing, and they're still developing, and they're still exercising, because talent is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, if you don't build it, it atrophies. So it's a constant mindset of where do you have natural talent and how do you can build and grow it to have exponential results. But here's where people get a little confused. They mix up this notion of knowledge, skill, and talent. And this is really important as you're being introspective, but it's also important as we shift momentarily to how you take this back to your own teams. Because it sounds really logical when you say it, or at least I think so. But when you put it into practice, it becomes more difficult. And that is this: knowledge is what you know, okay? I can recite the care path. I can recite the cookie recipe. Skill is being able to execute, to demonstrate that, to do the actual procedure required through that care path, to actually bake the cookies that people will eat, right? Talent is that part that says it comes naturally, it's spontaneous, I do it really well, it's intuitive, et cetera, et cetera. So often, however, where do we coach, counsel, follow up? We spend so much time walking around with a red ink pen, trying to get people to focus on what doesn't come naturally. And we ourselves waste a tremendous amount of time trying to fix, or what I like to say, put in what God left out, instead of the exponential success of leveling up that we can have when we focus on talent. So bottom line is, knowledge and skill, we can build. If we have the cognitive ability, we can build knowledge and skill. So what does that mean as we then shift to thinking about your teams? Well, first and foremost, it's critical in every organization, but particularly the work that you all do, that there's a culture fit. Would you agree with that? They have to fit the Inhabit culture and what's important to you and what you hold dear and the values and the mission of the organization. So that's table stakes. That's the ticket to admission, is having culture fit. Often we then resort predominantly to criteria fit, which is knowledge and skill. Now, I am not suggesting that I want someone performing surgery on me that isn't certified and educated and licensed to perform surgery, right? There's a minimum standard requirement, and that is certainly elevated in healthcare. But beyond that minimum standard requirement, we oftentimes pour a lot more emphasis into how long, where they've been, et cetera. Things that, frankly, in the changing workforce are becoming much less of a focus. And so where I would invite you to roll your dice, if you're going to take a chance, is on talent, the non-teachable. Teach the skill and knowledge, fill those gaps, lean on the natural talent, and again, back to you, over-index on potential. Lean into your potential. Build your skill and knowledge, but lean into your potential. So let's talk about what that means in sort of a framework. The human capital balance sheet. Now, I realize that this sounds really deep, not personalized, but it's a framework to help you think about your teams in, I think, a sort of practical and constructive and pragmatic way. So as we look at this, the why, the why is the knowledge and skill, axis is the knowledge and skill, and the x-axis is talent, right? So how much knowledge and skill do they have? How strong is their talent? Are their aces well aligned to the role I'm considering them for, or the role they're in? Now what we want is everybody in the top right? We want everybody to have aligned the aces to the role. So if we have a clinical team lead, we want them not only to have the experience that's required for the job and the knowledge and skill that are required to be a clinical team lead, but we also want them to have high talent for leading teams, which is different than the clinician that's in the home in that particular example. We also want to build an organization of strong potential, right? These are some of your emerging folks. Maybe they don't have all the skill and knowledge yet. They're a little green, if you will, but they have talent for days, right? They've got that kind of potential. You're like, this woman, this man has what it takes. And I want to pour in the knowledge and skill to those individuals. So this is where we want to hire. This is where we want to develop. This is where we want to spend our time. Now, I will tell you, statistically, I'm sure not true of habit, but statistically, 30% of an organization's employees fall on the right side of this framework. 70% on the left that we'll talk about next. So what happens when you have this high skill and knowledge, soft talent for role? Maybe they can do it sometimes. They smile sometimes. They like people sometimes, right? Not all the time, sometimes. Man, they have the knowledge and skill. They've got that in spades. Here's the question you have to ask yourself as a leader. And that is this person somebody with so much institutional knowledge, who's so great at the knowledge and skill, and we can mitigate the fact that they don't like people, and they're a role player? Just keep Sally doing this and kind of keep Sally or Bob or whoever away from everybody else, and it's good. Role player. Kind of know what we're getting, right? Oftentimes what happens, though, is what in fact that individual might be is a water treader. They're doing just enough to get by, to stay just enough under the radar, and they're also blocking an opportunity for you to bring in a top performer or a strong potential. So they're taking a really critical role and position on your team that you might want to really think deeply about. It's how much are you compromising by looking past the fact that the aces aren't aligned. Now remember, I said everyone has talent. The question is talent for what? And some folks have soft talent for the role they're in, and they have soft skill and knowledge for the role they're in. Now these people need to have a compassionate bus stop where we invite them to go work for someone else, namely the competition. Okay? Tracking? Or maybe they're an amazing culture fit. Maybe they've had a long and progressive and successful career with us, and we've promoted them into a job where they have soft skill and knowledge and doesn't align to their talents. That happens, right? That happens where we organizationally say, oh, so-and-so was such a great account executive, we're going to promote he or she to a business development director or manager. And then we come to find out that not only is there a skill and knowledge gap, but they don't really like leading people. They really like being out in the field and working with the hospitals and the SNFs and the docs, and that's what they love. But they were lured by the salary and the title, so that sounded great. And now we've taken this top performing account executive and we've moved them into this other role that had a sexier title and more money, et cetera. And we find that they're in the bottom left box. They're miscast. Sometimes those are hard to correct. They can be, especially if the person is willing. So what I'd like you to do right now, and I realize you're sitting with your own teams, but I'd like you to think about, I'm just going to give you time to think about, specifically one top performer that you have the benefit of working with. High skill and knowledge, high talent for role, rock star person. When you think about that person, if you're comfortable putting their initials in the box or writing it down or putting it on our paper, you can. Otherwise, track that in your mind. And I want you to think of one strong potential person on your team. And if you're struggling to come up with one of each of those, I want you to think about that and what that means as you go back in a couple of days and start rebuilding your team. Barb talked about the engagement data earlier. Didn't she do a great job? That was such fabulous information. By the way, congratulations on your numbers look really terrific. You guys should be really proud of yourselves. So kudos to you all. When we think about the 4.9, that's over on the left side of the framework. People that aren't engaged, that aren't fired up for their job, that are probably in the wrong seat, that are probably not playing to their strengths. When we think about lower scores, it's often the people that have retired on the job and stayed. Talented people don't retire on the job and stay, for the most part. Talented people leave. That's the unfortunate attrition. Good attrition is when somebody that's not a fit for the role recognizes it and exits on their own. What happens oftentimes is when you look at your engagement scores and you look at your leader scores and things of that nature where you find those lower scores is because somewhere in the mix you have role players or water treaders or people that are miscast. And it's really impactful when that's the leader. So what do I want you to do? You're going to deal with the left side. Where I want you to spend your time and attention is on the right. I want you to think about how do you re-recruit your top performer. One thing you can do when you go back to re-recruit your top performer to make them feel loved, excited, seen, appreciated, right? And I want you to think of one thing you can do when you go back to invest in your strong potential. Because if we're treating everyone the same on the team, if everyone's getting the same access to resources, if everyone's getting the same access to our time and attention, top performers will leave. Those who don't have talent for role will continue to stay because it beats the alternative. Everyone has talent, so this is not intended to be disparaging of those people that are potentially miscast. You're giving them a gift by helping them go find something that's going to make their heart sing. All right, so everyone has talent. It's a notion of varsity versus recreational, and here's what we know in the data right now, specifically as it relates to the workforce, and particularly the next generations coming into the workforce, is They're very particular about the cultures in which they'll work. They have a very high standard in terms of what they expect from their leader, what they expect from the culture, how they expect to be invested in. And they don't want to be on a recreational team. They don't want to be on a team where everybody gets a turn at quarterback. They want to be on a team where if they're the best doggone quarterback, they want to play quarterback. And if you're a great kicker, you go do kicking or receiving or blocking or all the things, right? They want to be on a team where the best people get to fill the best roles. Not everybody gets a turn. Are you building a varsity team? Are you a varsity coach? Fair versus just comes up a lot because there's this notion in the back of our minds where it's like, well, I can't do one thing for one person on my team and not do it for everyone, right? That's not fair, as my almost 4-year-old granddaughter and almost 3-year-old granddaughter would say. It's not fair, Cece. Life isn't fair, girls. It's not about fair, it's about just. What is just is doing the right thing for that individual that they need, not the same for everyone. If one individual has a specific need on a specific day to attend to family requirements or things of that nature, but it doesn't apply to everyone, does everyone have to have that same accommodation? Or nobody gets the accommodation, right? That's just is doing the right things at an individual level. And one of the most just things you can do is move people out of a role that is not a good fit. Because you know what their dinner table talk is? How miserable they are, how hard things are, how they don't feel like they're performing. And you know what your dinner table talk is? What a pain they are, how they're not getting the job done, right? We all know, we laugh because it's true, right? So the most just thing you can do is help individuals find their joy. And I promise you this, we talk about growth, we talk about leveling up. It is truly, truly the only sustainable competitive advantage. Other people do what you do. And I had the great joy and blessing of talking to about 8 of you prior to coming, learning about your infrastructure, learning about your culture, learning about your day in the life. What an incredible experience it was to learn from so many of you. And I'm so grateful for that. But what I heard over and over and over again is how important relationships are. Whether that's the relationships between the operations and the business development side and working in concert, whether that's the relationship with the home office, whether that's the relationship with the local hospitals, providers, skilled nursing facilities, et cetera, those relationships really matter. And so once again, ensuring you have the right people in the right role will strengthen those relationships. So your call to action, and take just a moment for you to think and reflect. I think Tanya mentioned you have a paper in front of you. What is your aspirational next related to your talent? What do you aspire to do next professionally, to take ownership and agency around? And by the way, when I talk about an aspirational next, that does not necessarily equate to the proverbial corporate ladder. That could be a certification. It could be an advanced degree. It could be a lateral move. It could be a job expansion. It could be volunteering on a community board. It could be anything that's going to help grow and develop you as an individual. Because unapologetic, guilt-free investment in you is one of the biggest payoffs you'll ever receive. Bet on yourself first. So what is your aspirational next? Who have you shared that with? Does anybody know? I don't know about you, but most people are not mind readers. And so if you're keeping it to yourself and nobody knows what you aspire and you're not taking agency around your next step, it's probably not going to happen in real short order. And people aren't going to do it for you. That notion of it's my leader's job to pave the way for my future is outdated thinking. We have to pave the way. And there's so many opportunities right here in your organization to continue to grow and flourish. What one thing do you need to do to start intentionally working on today to invest in your development? Strength development, not the thing that doesn't come naturally that you're gonna go prove somebody wrong and learn how to do. Not that thing. The thing that you do really well, that you love doing and you wanna do more of, how do you continue to grow and strengthen and build that muscle? And make a plan. That's a lot, right? That's a lot to take away, but I would offer to you, it's kind of like the idea of put your mask on first. If we don't first do a lot of introspection, a lot of thinking about who we are, where our talents align, where we show up, at every level of the organization, we never outgrow the need to grow and develop. We have to continue to focus there. And we're better leaders of others when we put our mask on first. All right, second call to action. Choose one top performer and one high potential. We talked about this earlier. I want you to schedule a career investment conversation. Sounds really fancy, right? Be really careful how you schedule this, because people might go, uh-oh. A career investment conversation, what does that mean exactly? I want you to ask them, what is their aspirational next? What is your top performer's aspirational next? Are they at the top of their top? What is that person with high potential's aspirational next? You're giving them permission to share it with you. Doesn't mean you have to agree, by the way. That's for another day. That's for another session. And then have them make a plan, right? Empower them rather than enable them. Barb talked about that earlier, right? Be Michael's family. Encourage them. Support them. Create opportunity for them. But don't do it for them, don't enable them, and of course don't discourage them. This is how you level up. You level up yourself, and you focus on where the potential lies, rather than spending and consuming so much time where the problems lie, right? Those tend to be real time suckers. So deal with those things, but invest your time with your top performers. This is a blueprint. We can make this available to you. It's also available on my website, which I'll have on the final slide. You can scan the QR code. It's free, so if you want to download the blueprint, it's just a nice tool. If you want to create your own, that's fine. But it allows you to sit down with that high potential, with that top performer, with yourself, and say, what is my aspirational next? What area am I going to focus on? Is it a skill or knowledge I need to build, or is it a talent I'm going to develop? When am I going to start? What's my target? And how am I checking in quarterly to see how I'm doing? So I invite you to use this first with yourself, practice on yourself, and then create a career investment conversation with those high potential folks and invest in them. You will be amazed at the engagement when you sit down with people and say, I want to hear what you want to do next. You're not making promises. You're not putting it on a timeline. You're merely creating the conversation. So back to this young lady. Jordan figured out her voice, and we were living in Southern California. My kids were raised in Southern California at the time, and she found acting, and in particular, she found musical theater and loved it. And trust me, I was not a stage mom. I had a professional career. I was traveling, working, doing all the things, and penning the checks for her to go, be in these plays and do all this fun stuff. She comes to me when she's about 12, and she says, Mom, I figured out my backup plan if this whole singing, acting, Broadway, Grammys doesn't work out. And of course, I'm a professional woman. I get a paycheck every other week in my account and work hard, and I'm thinking, well, thank goodness, because that's a really hard career, and she's great, but wow. So I'm like, oh, thank God. I said, okay, honey, good. What is it? And she looks at me and she says, without hesitation, a female stand-up comedian. That was my reaction. Not my best mommy moment, I might add. I'm like, Jordan, really? If you don't make it in music and theater and on the big stage and all of that, your backup plan is to go into this other very obscure career and be a female stand-up comedian. She looks at me and she says, yes, Mom, I have no small dreams. She didn't and doesn't. Out of the mouths of babes, right? I don't have small dreams. I don't have small dreams for me, for my kids, for my grandchildren. I don't have small dreams for any of you. I hope you don't have small dreams for yourself. I hope that you are just as invested in your growth, in your development, in your future, and what is your next here at Inhabit as you continue to level up and continue to make this organization great, to continue to invest so that families around the country can benefit from what you do. But you do that with big dreams. You do that by getting past imposter syndrome. You do that by rolling the dice on potential, not limiting yourself based on non-predictive things. When we bank on the future, when we bank on potential, we see in the evidence, organizations that have moved to a talent-based organization see in the evidence increased coworker engagement, employee engagement. People like to work next to people that are like them. They want to be on an all-star team. They won't want to work with the person that's not pulling their weight, right? You want to be on an all-star team. You want to lead an all-star team. I love the competition that's going on, right? That speaks to the importance of we want to be the best for all the right reasons. Productivity goes up. We know statistically that you can have 2 highly talented people for role outperform 5 average people for role. Best performer retention increases. So instead of talent leaving and those that don't have talent for role retiring on the job and staying, you keep the best of the best. Quality of care goes up. We've seen it statistically in the data. We've seen it in HCAHPS. We've seen it in CGCAHPS. Scores improve. Your brand reputation continues to thrive. And you attain the incredible performance goals that Barb laid out this morning. There's a real business impact to having every person do work that brings them joy. And it's felt. We sadly lost Gigi in February of 22. And I wish I could say, particularly after having spoken to several of you on the hospice side of the organization, that we had had the benefit. Because all Gigi wanted to do was go home. Her congestive heart failure had worsened. Her situation was not improving. She was stable enough to be moved to skilled nursing. Her situation started to decline, and she refused to go back to the hospital. She wanted to go home. And we were met with a lot of pushback in that situation. And so Gigi made her own decision, and she went to God that night. She didn't have to go back to the hospital. What I would have loved is for us to have had the social worker, the care team, individuals to walk us through those last days leading up to her death, to care for the family, and to give us a sense of peace and her a sense of peace, to have the same dignity in death that she was given in life. Again, with a huge credit to the work that you all do. Gigi was my inspiration. I know she'd be proud. She'd be particularly proud that I had the privilege and honor to be with all of you today. And before I just completely close and wrap, I want to say thank you to this AV team. Thank you to the Gaylord for the amazing work they do here. Thank you to Barb and Tanya for inviting me to be with you. And thank you to each of you for the noble profession that you are involved in. You all are going to crush it throughout the rest of this year and into 2025, and keep making a difference. Keep leveling up for yourself, for your teams, and for your communities. Thank you very much.